I'm Mary Beth Trubitt, and today Jamie Lockhart and I will be presenting Architecture within a Caddo Mound in Hot Spring County, a preliminary view. At the Arkansas Archeological Survey, we've begun a new research program of archeogeophysical surveying and mapping at Site 3HS22, where a large 2- or 3-stage temple mound was recorded in 1967. Pottery attributed to this place suggests use at least to the Mid-Ouachita and Social Hill phases, circa AD 1350 to 1600. When the mound was partially leveled in 1976, Ann Early, then the survey's research station archaeologist at Henderson State University, observed a series of construction stages and burned structures in both its higher and lower levels. Our preliminary gradiometry survey from new fieldwork at the site this past summer shows anomalies we interpret as structures and other features within or below the mound remnant. To begin, we need to acknowledge that the earthen mounds constructed in Arkansas and other locations across eastern North America in the past are still considered to be important historical places and significant cultural landmarks for Native people. Some mounds were used as cemeteries and should be treated with caution and respect. We started this archaeological project by obtaining permissions from both a landowning family and from the chairman of the Caddo Nation of Oklahoma. The Caddo people are the living descendants of the people who built this and other mounds in Hot Spring County during the last millennium. While we're excited to present results of our research today, we will not be more specific in showing locations of archaeological sites. We do this to protect property owners from potential trespassers and to protect mounds and cemeteries from further looting and desecration. In today's presentation, we address three main questions. Why is it important to preserve mounds? Why were they built and what's in them? And how can we use modern archaeological technology to learn about these historic places without destroying them in the process? We will then focus on preliminary results from our new research project. In 2014, mounds across the state were highlighted as a category of Arkansas's most endangered places by Preserve Arkansas. To quote from their listing, mounds serve as a representation of the native people of Arkansas through many different cultures and time periods. They were homes to priests and chiefs and the last resting place for honored members of ancient societies. Mounds have been destroyed by people curious about their contents, looters looking for items to sell, erosion caused by stream cutting, and by residential and industrial development. Under current circumstances, it is likely there will be no more mounds in many agricultural areas of Arkansas in the near future, unless efforts are made to accommodate mound survival." End quote. The National Register of Historic Places records numerous standing buildings as significant locations to our shared history, but few mounds are so designated. The impact of this is that the history of indigenous societies may be ignored or devalued. Earthen mounds across Arkansas are monuments that stand as testament to the long and enduring Native presence here. In the case of Archaeological Site 3HS22, we credit the farming family that owns this land with the ongoing preservation of the mound and environs that was home to a thriving Caddo community some 500 years ago. The earliest mound in Arkansas was constructed about 3,500 years ago, and mound building continued until about 400 years ago. During these different eras, mounds had varying forms and purposes, and they were created and maintained by distinct native societies, each with its own cultural tradition. Mounds were built as part of community rituals, as territorial or astronomical markers, for burials of important people, as platforms for significant buildings or housing for the leadership. Over the last century, looters, as well as archaeologists, have dug into mounds, desecrating graves to get pots and other grave goods, destroying mounds in the process. Farmers have bulldozed mounds to level fields for agriculture, and mounds have eroded and washed into rivers during floods. Many of the mounds that remain in southwest Arkansas are architectural mounds that incorporated buildings, often burned and covered with earth. There are several examples of these from the Caddo area. In 1939, prior to the inundation of Lake Ouachita, a Works Progress Administration crew cut a trench through the main mound at Adair. A series of at least 9 building floors show in their profile drawing. In 1972, Frank Schambach led an Arkansas Archeological Survey and Arkansas Archaeological Society team in salvage excavations at Ferguson in Hempstead County. They documented a series of burned buildings on the upper and lower platforms of Mound A before it was leveled. Here, each burned structure was collapsed in and buried with a layer of sand before another structure was built on top. Similarly, Cynthia Weber from the survey's HSU Research Station led excavations at Hayes after it was partially leveled, documenting circular structures that she argued were used for ritual and for residence on upper and lower stages of the mound. After burned structural debris was uncovered by bulldozing at another Clark County mound in 2006, Matt Reynolds and I recorded superimposed circular and rectangular buildings. These examples of architectural mounds were documented as salvage operations, as the ancient earthen constructions were being leveled for farming or development. If the mound is not threatened, we want to investigate using modern archaeological technology that gives us a view with minimal disturbance to the site and its architecture. Here we benefit from Jamie Lockhart's experience. Dr. Lockhart, who heads the survey's computer services program in Fayetteville, has used a suite of archeogeophysical techniques to survey sites across the state, including Caddo mounds in southwest Arkansas. During his dissertation research at the Tom Jones site, he showed how multiple techniques could be successfully employed to detect variation in soil moisture, texture, and magnetism, revealing ancient architectural features. Gradiometry can be used over large areas to measure differences in soil magnetism, revealing not only historic metal, but also the presence of burned buildings and burned soil. Resistivity surveying can be used to detect differences in soil moisture, typically indicating past disturbances or compaction. Ground-penetrating radar can be used to detect changes in soil compaction within earthen mounds, indicating earlier stages or surfaces and construction features. By using multiple techniques over the same area, Lockhart showed how ancient cultural features, such as burned structures and hearths, can display different and identifiable patterns. In several cases, the anomalies that he identified in the archeogeophysical surveying were ground-truthed by excavations, corroborating their identifications as cultural constructions. Furthermore, these techniques can be applied to large areas to both document archaeological sites and allow land managers to better preserve them. Duncan McKinnon's survey of a large portion of the Battle Mound site resulted in a picture of this important Caddo community, including near-mound architecture and borrow pits, and more distant habitation areas and cemeteries. While he summarized the results of previous excavations, he did note additional archaeological excavations at the site. Using archeogeophysical surveying, he showed the layout of the battle community beyond the mound, set in the cultural landscape of its neighborhood and outlying region. We would like to do the same with the Caddo Mound site in Hot Spring County. When recorded in 1967, Site 3HS22 was described as a large mound, 20 feet high, 150 yards long, covered in trees and brush in a cultivated field. Based on the styles of the pottery and other artifacts collected by several people during the 20th century and attributed to this site, we can estimate that its main use was during the Mid-Ouachita and Social Hill phases, circa AD 1350 to 1600. In 1976, Anne Early recorded her observations as the farmer at that time removed the upper portion of the mound with a bulldozer. Based on her description, the mound had a series of structures on its higher eastern and lower western ends. She observed 2 graves in the upper stratum on the east side. Human remains of 3 individuals were later donated to the HSU station, transferred to Fayetteville for NAGPRA documentation, published in the Federal Register, and have been repatriated to the Caddo Nation. Dr. Early collected fragments of burned timbers from two burned structures near the center of the mound. These are still at the HSU curation and could be radiocarbon dated. After bulldozing, the field was planted in pasture, and the mound remnant was left undisturbed. In the early 1990s, archaeologists from the Arkansas Highway and Transportation Department, now ARDOT, surveyed and tested an area near the mound in advance of road construction. Their work involved mechanical stripping of several shallow trenches along the proposed realignment to see if cultural features were there that would be impacted by the construction. Their findings extended the site boundaries of 3HS22, and they identified a new site about 300 meters away. In his report, John Miller interpreted the new one as a small habitation or farmstead dating to the east to Mid-Ouachita phase, AD 1100 to 1500. So, prior to our 2021 project, we have a picture of the mound itself with burned structures within it, and burials and cemetery areas in and adjacent to it, and several nearby areas with residential features and debris that may be roughly contemporaneous. There's potential for intact architectural residues in and below the mound despite the partial bulldozing, as well as additional areas beyond the mound with cultural features still preserved despite the floodplain setting and decades of farming. Encouraged by the current landowners, we began a program of archeogeophysical surveying to document the mound and its surrounding cultural landscape without disturbing subsurface deposits. We started with electronic total station mapping and precision GPS readings to keep accurate location during subsequent surveys. We set out an 80 by 200 meter block, 1.6 hectares or about 4 acres, staking the corners of each 20 by 20 meter square within it. In the process, we were able to create a new topographic map of the truncated mound, which now stands about 50 by 80 meters and about 2 meters tall. Over 2 days in June and July, Dr. Lockhart led the gradiometry survey, walking transects back and forth across each of the 40 20 by 20 meter grid squares. The data were collected using a Bardington 601-2 set for 0.01 nanotesla sensitivity and a resolution composed of 50 centimeter traverses with measurements taken every 12.5 centimeters along each traverse. In processing, the data were assembled, mosaicked, de-striped to remove heading errors, de-staggered for better alignment between traverses, and interpolated to 12.5 centimeter XY resolution. The data were then georeferenced to the UTM NAD83 geographic coordinate system within GIS software, which allows the data to be clipped to accentuate anomalies for visualization, or alternatively, determine the actual magnitude of each original measurement as it was collected in the field. Our initial interpretations must concede massive mechanized disturbance. Lockhart identified metal dipoles and has taken them into account. The processed data indicate both curvilinear and rectilinear patterning. We interpret at least 12 to 15 differentially burned structures with circular or ovate patterning predominating on the mound. The most apparent of these distinctly regular circular anomalies occur along the mound's apex. If the perimeters of these anomalies represent walls, we've not yet ruled out circular activity areas, these structures would have been large, as much as 12 to 15 meters in diameter, and they appear to have been constructed with central hearths. Here we've highlighted some of the anomalies. The red dots indicate larger metal dipoles. The data indicate some superposition, indicating the potential for successive episodes. In the future, we may be able to use ground-penetrating radar to clarify this. GPR has the capability to differentiate features by depth and has been used to identify buried surfaces within mounds. If these circular anomalies are burned circular structures measuring 12 to 15 meters in diameter, that would be about 40 to 50 feet. As a comparison, the reproduction grass house that Phil Cross and his team built at Caddo Mound's State Historic Site in Texas several years ago, the one destroyed by the 2019 tornado, was 25 feet in diameter. Not all interpreted structures display this large size or perfectly circular pattern. There's an ovate grouping of structures that trends southward from the apex of the mound. This grouping, and here I'm looking at the blue oval, this grouping is on an elevated topography that may indicate a conjoined earthen platform with structures facing inward toward a common plaza or activity area. This plaza area shows indications of anthropogenic magnetic enrichment. The structures here vary in size from 6 to 10 meters, and perhaps larger. There is also one particularly well-formed structure-like anomaly south of the apex and east of the ovate grouping. Using the original unprocessed data, the interpreted structures range in magnetism from approximately 10 to 20 nanotesla. Interpreted hearths measure approximately 50 nanotesla. In addition, the data present numerous magnetic anomalies consistent with hearths, pits, posts, and possibly burials. A very regular line of relatively large, evenly spaced anomalies southeast of the mound suggests planning. This pattern could represent a demarcation between the sacred ceremonial space and the profane outside. There are numerous smaller discrete anomalies that compel additional quantification and interpretation. Long linear anomalies in the southeastern portion of our data coverage conform to a topographic low area that's largely devoid of magnetic anomalies, save small bits of metal. It's not yet clear to us whether this low area is a borrow pit where earth was taken for building the mound, or modern disturbance. Based on our current information, there are notably fewer anomalies east and west of the intensively used primary mound area. This suggests a core, civil, ceremonial center set apart. The degree of separation is yet to be determined. We plan additional fieldwork to extend the area of gradiometry coverage. With this project, we're using archeogeophysical surveying techniques to document the spatial patterning of the mound and its larger community. We can identify residues of cultural constructions, such as houses, pits, cemeteries, or ceremonial buildings in the surrounding area. This is one of the largest Caddo mounds still standing in Hot Spring County. It's currently protected by the property owner and well managed with a cover of pasture grass. We do not plan any archaeological excavations in the mound, especially since we know it was once used as a burial place in addition to its architecture. Arkansas now has a burial law that protects graves, marked and unmarked, in cemeteries from all time periods. Documentation of the larger cultural landscape using archeogeophysical surveying will help to interpret the site, enhancing its continued preservation. The information gained can bring further awareness of the history and significance of this place to contemporary Caddo people in Oklahoma and to the local community here in Arkansas. Thank you.